The Ferengi learned not to mock human warriors the hard way, by watching their finest troops get slaughtered by Terran Marines. For centuries, the vast Ferengi Empire had expanded across the galaxy, conquering hundreds of star systems and alien races. To the Ferengi, humans were just another primitive species ripe for subjugation, a backwater civilization barely worth noticing. So when a territorial dispute flared between the Ferengi and Earth over a contested star system, Ferengi Admiral Galen openly laughed at humanity's pitiful military forces arrayed against him. Galen's battle fleet arrived in orbit over the disputed world and found a single Earth warship waiting for them, hopelessly outnumbered and outgunned. On the human vessel, Sergeant Johnny Brown and his squad of Marines stood ready to repel the Ferengi invasion. They all knew Earth couldn't afford to lose this strategic system, and they were determined to make the arrogant Ferengi choke on their laughter by unleashing hell. As the two fleets faced off in a tense standoff, Admiral Galen hailed the human ship and demanded their immediate surrender. He mocked their pathetic numbers and obsolete technology, promising to crush them like insects if they didn't submit to Ferengi rule. The human captain coldly refused, and Galen eagerly ordered an all-out attack, wanting this to be a quick object lesson in the futility of defying Ferengi supremacy. Swarms of Ferengi fighters descended on the lone Earth ship, their pilots already savoring an easy kill. But to their disbelief, the Earth vessel's point defense turrets lit up with deadly precision, expertly swatting Ferengi craft from the sky. The Ferengi capital ships joined the assault, but the human armor and shields held firm, repelling even their most devastating barrages. Under Sergeant Brown's leadership, heavily armed squads of Marines boarded assault shuttles and launched a fierce counterattack. They fearlessly flew straight into the teeth of the Ferengi fleet and smashed through their hangar shield, storming the alien flagship with superhuman speed and reflexes. The ship's corridors echoed with human battle cries and the screams of dying Ferengi. Admiral Galen watched in stunned disbelief as his elite warriors fell by the dozens to the human onslaught, which showed no sign of stopping until his command was a burning ruin. In a final desperate gambit, Galen activated his ship's superweapon, a planet-cracking beam that would wipe out the human borders, their mothership, and the disputed world below. Sergeant Brown led his Marines in a frantic close-quarters battle to the flagship's bridge, racing against time before the superweapon could fire. They blew the bridge doors open, stormed in with guns blazing, and Brown tackled Admiral Galen, grappling to keep his scaly finger from pressing the firing button, just as human reinforcement ships seized control of the Ferengi fleet. In the aftermath, a defeated and utterly humiliated Admiral Galen was forced to admit that he had severely underestimated both human tenacity and their prowess at war. The Ferengi invasion force surrendered and withdrew, leaving the strategic star system in human hands. Sergeant Brown and his Marines stood bloody but unbowed, having shown the galaxy that humanity would never kneel to alien aggression. But even in victory, both humans and Ferengi knew this was just the opening skirmish in a much larger war. A war in which the Ferengi would not again make the mistake of laughing at the human military, or the indomitable human spirit. In the aftermath of their stinging defeat, the Ferengi fleet limped back to their homeworld, leaving the disputed star system firmly in human hands. But for Admiral Galen, the true reckoning was just beginning. As his battered ship docked at the orbital spaceport, a grim-faced contingent of the Emperor's personal guard was already waiting on the landing pad. They seized Galen the moment he set foot on Ferengi soil, dragging him away in chains to face the Emperor's wrath. In the cavernous throne room, the Emperor loomed over Galen, his mottled green face twisted with rage. "You dare return here after such a disgrace?" the Emperor snarled. "I gave you the finest ships and warriors in the Ferengi Imperium, and you let them be slaughtered by those hairless apes." Galen prostrated himself before the throne, trembling. "Please, my lord, I beg for mercy. The humans, they fought with a savagery we've never encountered before. Their technology—" "Silence!" The Emperor backhanded Galen, sending him sprawling. "I will not listen to your pathetic excuses." He gestured to his guards. "Strip this fool of his rank and prepare him for public execution. Let his death serve as a warning to all who would fail me. As the guards hauled Galen away, the disgraced admiral's mind raced desperately. He had to find a way to redeem himself, to prove his worth to the emperor once more. And then, in a flash of malevolent inspiration, he had it. "Wait!" Galen cried out. "My lord, I have a plan. A way to crush the humans without risking any more of our ships or troops." The emperor paused. His curiosity piqued despite his anger. "Speak quickly, Galen, before I lose my patience." Licking his bloodied lips, Galen outlined his scheme. A devastating bioweapon, a virus engineered to target humans and humans alone. "We can wipe out their forces on that planet without setting foot on the surface," he promised. "Let me unleash this plague, and I will deliver you victory." The emperor considered for a long moment. "Very well, Galen. You shall have your chance for redemption. But mark my words. If you fail me again, you will beg for a quick death." Dismissed with a wave of the emperor's hand, Galen scurried from the throne room, already plotting his revenge. The humans would pay for his humiliation, even if he had to poison every last one of them to do it. On the contested world, Sergeant Johnny Brown and his Marines had no time to rest on their laurels. As the adrenaline of battle faded, the grim reality set in. They were now occupiers of this ravaged planet, responsible for the shell-shocked populace and the fragile infrastructure left behind. While Johnny coordinated patrols and relief efforts, his tech specialist, Private Mike Sorensen, worked to tap into the Ferengi communications network they had just captured. It was Mike who first noticed the anomalies, whispers of a secret project, a weapons lab hidden somewhere off-world. "Sarge, I think the Ferengi are up to something," Mike said, his brow furrowed as he pored over intercepted transmissions. "I keep seeing references to something called Orcs strain. I don't know what it is, but I've got a bad feeling." Johnny frowned. "Keep digging. If those pointy-eared bastards are planning some kind of retaliation, I want to know about it." But even Johnny couldn't have predicted the horror that was about to be unleashed. On the far side of the planet, undetected by the human sensors, a handful of Ferengi stealth ships slipped into low orbit. Their cargo bays opened, releasing a swarm of small, nondescript drones that descended through the atmosphere and dispersed across the planet's surface. Within hours, the first cases began to appear. Soldiers and civilians alike collapsing in agony, their bodies racked by convulsions and fever. By the time anyone realized it was more than a simple outbreak, it was too late. The engineered virus spread like wildfire, leaping from victim to victim with terrifying speed. In their sealed power armor, Johnny and his Marines were safe from infection, but they could only watch helplessly as bases fell silent and cities went dark. The planet that had been a battleground just days before was now a tomb, its streets littered with the bodies of the dead and dying. "We have to stop this," Johnny growled, his hands clenched into fists. "We have to find whoever's responsible and make them pay." But as the drones continued to spread their lethal payload and the death toll climbed into the thousands, Johnny knew they were in a race against time, a race they couldn't afford to lose. The Earth carrier hummed as Johnny Brown sat in the medical bay, staring at his reflection in the polished metal surface. His face looked gaunt, the weight of recent events etched into every line. The bioweapon attack haunted his dreams, the screams of the dying echoing in his ears even now. "Lieutenant Brown?" A voice broke through his reverie. Johnny turned to see Captain Harris standing in the doorway. "Congratulations on the promotion. You earned it." Johnny nodded, his voice low. "Thank you, sir, but I'd trade this new rank for even one of those lives we lost in a heartbeat." Harris's expression tightened. "I understand, but we need leaders like you now more than ever. Intel just decoded some Ferengi transmissions. It's not good." Johnny listened intently as Harris laid out the situation. The Ferengi were amassing a massive fleet, aiming to strike at New Harris Colony. Millions of civilians in the crosshairs. "They want to make an example of us," Johnny said, his fists clenching. "Show the galaxy what happens when you stand up to the Ferengi." "Exactly. And we're not going to let that happen. Your unit is leading the defense. You ship out in an hour. The journey to New Harris passed in a blur of planning and preparation. As they touched down on the colony world, Johnny hit the ground running. He coordinated with local militia leaders, oversaw the installation of defensive batteries, and tried to shore up their meager forces as best he could. But as he looked out over the sprawling cities and settlements of New Harris, a cold knot formed in his stomach. They were so exposed, so vulnerable, and the Ferengi were coming in force. The attack, when it came, was overwhelming. The sky filled with Ferengi warships, more than Johnny had ever seen in one place. A harsh voice crackled over the comms, Supreme Commander Thokin demanding their surrender. "Like hell," Johnny growled, signaling the response. "We don't bow to bullies." The bombardment began moments later. Massive energy beams lanced down from orbit, carving fiery swaths through New Harris. Buildings toppled, streets cratered, and the air filled with the screams of terrified civilians. Johnny raced through the chaos, barking orders into his comm. "Echo Squad, cover that evac route. Delta, I need those gun emplacements operational 5 minutes ago." But for every small victory, there were a dozen setbacks. The Ferengi troops poured onto the surface in waves, their weapons cutting down militia and civilians alike. Johnny watched helplessly as entire city blocks were reduced to smoking rubble. As the situation grew increasingly desperate, Johnny knew they needed a game changer. He gathered his most trusted soldiers, outlining a last-ditch plan to infiltrate Thokin's flagship. "It's a long shot," he admitted, "but if we can take out their leader, it might buy us the time we need." The team fought their way through waves of Ferengi shock troops, using every trick and tactic they'd learned. Johnny lost count of how many times they nearly died, how many close calls left them battered and bleeding. But somehow, in a seemingly impossible way, they made it aboard Thokin's massive vessel. The ship's corridors became a battleground as Johnny's squad pushed forward. They cleared room after room, leaving a trail of Ferengi bodies in their wake. But their own numbers dwindled too, good soldiers falling to enemy fire. When they finally breached the bridge, Johnny's heart nearly stopped. There stood Supreme Commander Thokin, and next to him, looking singed but very much alive, was Admiral Galen. "Impossible," Johnny breathed. Thokin sneered. "Your pitiful attack ends here, human. We will crush your pathetic colony and—" But his words were cut off as Galen suddenly shoved him aside, lunging for a control panel. "You fool!" Galen shouted. "You were just a pawn. The Emperor will fall, and I will—" Johnny didn't hesitate. His rifle came up and he fired, catching Galen square in the chest. The Ferengi Admiral stumbled back, a look of shock on his face. But even as he fell, his hand slammed down on a glowing red button. Alarms blared throughout the ship as Thokin howled in rage. "The World Burner! You've doomed us all!" Through the bridge view screen, Johnny watched in horror as a massive weapon began to power up, its muzzle aimed directly at New Harris. He knew in that moment that millions of lives hung in the balance, with only seconds left to act. Johnny hit his fist on the shuttle controls, willing the battered craft to move faster as New Harris vanished in a blinding flash behind them. The screens flickered, overloaded by the apocalyptic energies unleashed on the doomed colony. "My God," Private Sorensen whispered, his face ashen as he stared at the rear view screen. Where a thriving world had stood moments before, only a glowing ember remained, pockmarked with massive impact craters still visible from orbit. Johnny closed his eyes for a moment, the weight of millions of lost lives crushing down on him. When he opened them again, his jaw was set. "Get me a channel to all surviving human ships," he ordered. As the ragtag fleet of escape vessels gathered, Johnny's voice crackled over the comms. "This isn't the end. We will make the Ferengi pay for what they've done here today." But even as he spoke, an alert flashed on Sorensen's console. "Sir, we're picking up an encrypted transmission. It's coming from the Ferengi homeworld." Johnny frowned. "A taunt from those bastards?" "No, sir," Sorensen replied, fingers flying over the decryption protocols. "It's a resistance group. They want to help us." The face that appeared on the interface was unlike any Ferengi Johnny had seen before. Her features were softer, almost compassionate. "I am Zahara," she said, her voice low and urgent. "There isn't much time. The attack on your colony was just the beginning." She outlined a plan so monstrous it seemed unbelievable, a weapon capable of sterilizing entire star systems in one strike. "Our leaders have gone mad with power," Zahara explained. "Many of us want no part of this genocide." Johnny leaned forward, his mind racing. "Where is this weapon? How can we stop it?" "It's being assembled in a shipyard facility orbiting our homeworld," Zahara replied. "Heavily guarded, of course. But with our help, you might have a chance to sabotage it before it's completed." Hours later, Johnny found himself crouched in the cargo hold of a Ferengi supply ship, surrounded by his hand-picked team of Spec Ops troopers. The plan was insane, relying on split-second timing and 1,000 things that could go wrong. As they neared the massive shipyard, Johnny's earpiece crackled. "Security scan incoming," Zahara's voice warned. "Now!" On cue, the resistance operatives piloting the transport transmitted a series of falsified credentials. Johnny held his breath, sweat beading on his forehead in the stifling hold. An eternity seemed to pass before Zahara's voice returned. "We're through. Prepare for docking." The instant the airlock cycled open, Johnny and his team surged forward. They moved swiftly through shadowy corridors, guided by the intelligence Zahara had provided. The air grew increasingly hot and sulfurous as they penetrated deeper into the facility. "There," Sorensen hissed, indicating a massive set of blast doors. "The main assembly area should be through there." No sooner had the words left his mouth than alarms began to blare. A harsh voice boomed over the facility's speakers. "Intruders detected in Sector 7. This is Overseer Kozak. All security forces converge and terminate with extreme prejudice." "So much for stealth," Johnny muttered. "Breaching charges now." The doors blew inward with a thunderous roar. As acrid smoke billowed around them, Johnny caught his first glimpse of the monstrosity taking shape within. It dwarfed anything he'd ever seen, a weapon of terrifying scale. But there was no time to gawk. From all sides came the sounds of approaching security forces. "Sorensen, get to work on those detonators," Johnny barked. "The rest of you, defensive positions." What followed was a nightmare of close-quarters combat. Ferengi battle mechs lumbered forward, their energy weapons carving molten furrows in the deck plating. Behind them came things that defied description, vat-grown monstrosities bred for war. Johnny's team fought with desperate fury, but they were outnumbered and outgunned. One by one, his soldiers fell. "Charges are set," Sorensen yelled over the din of battle. "But the detonator's damaged. Someone has to trigger it manually." Johnny made the call in an instant. "Jenkins Ramirez, get Sorensen to the extraction point. I'll handle this." As his remaining team members fought their way towards escape, Johnny turned to face the oncoming horde. He allowed himself a grim smile as he saw a familiar face among the Ferengi forces. "Galen," he spat, "I thought I killed you once already." The Ferengi admiral's laugh was a metallic rasp. Where his chest had been blasted open by Johnny's shot, whirring servos and pulsing energy conduits were visible. "You can't kill progress, human," Galen sneered. "The strong survive. The weak perish. It is the way of things." Johnny's hands tightened on his weapon. "Then let's see who's stronger." As they clashed amid the sweltering heat of the reactor core, Johnny realized with growing dread that Galen's cybernetic enhancements made him nearly unstoppable. Each punishing blow drove Johnny back, his armor cracking under the assault. But even as his body faltered, Johnny's mind raced. He feinted left, then dove right, directly for the manual detonator. Galen howled in rage, lunging after him. Johnny's fingers closed around the trigger just as Galen's cybernetic hand clamped down on his throat. He looked into the Ferengi's mad eyes and managed a bloodied grin. "Strength isn't everything," Johnny gasped, and he squeezed the trigger. The detonator clicked. Johnny's world exploded into searing white agony. He tumbled through the air, the reactor's infernal heat blistering his skin. His body slammed against the catwalk, metal screeching as it buckled. Through blurred vision, He saw Galen's cybernetic form advancing, plasma cannons glowing. A burst of energy tore through Johnny's armor. He screamed as his left side erupted in flames. The stench of burning flesh filled his nostrils. He tried to move, but his body refused to obey. Galen loomed over him, metal feet clanging on the catwalk. "Your pathetic resistance ends here, human," he sneered. A high-pitched whine cut through the air. Particle rifle fire peppered Galen's armored hide. Johnny's head lolled to the side. There stood Zahara, her face streaked with soot and blood. "Get away from him, you monster!" she shouted, unleashing another barrage. Galen roared, pivoting to face this new threat. His plasma cannons blazed to life, forcing Zahara to dive for cover. Johnny's fingers scrabbled weakly at his belt. His vision swam, darkness creeping in at the edges. He heard Zahara cry out in pain. "Foolish female," Galen growled. "Your species is weak. You will all burn." "No," Zahara gasped. "We are strong." A blinding flash. The catwalk shuddered. Johnny's ears rang as the plasma charge detonated. Through the haze of pain, he saw two figures engulfed in blue-white fire. "Zahara," he croaked. But there was no response. Only the reactor's angry rumble remained. Survival instinct kicked in. Johnny dragged himself across the scorching metal, each movement pure agony. His left arm hung useless, a charred ruin. Blood and sweat stung his eyes. The exit hatch swam into view. Johnny smacked his head against the controls, metal shrieking as it opened. He pulled himself through, tumbling into the corridor beyond. Alarms blared. The ship shuddered. Johnny crawled, leaving a trail of blood and burned flesh. His lungs burned with each ragged breath. "Brown, over here!" Hands grabbed him, hauling him to his feet. Sorensen's face swam into focus, eyes wide with horror. "Jesus, sir, we need to go, now!" They staggered through twisting corridors. Johnny's legs gave out. Sorensen half carried, half dragged him the rest of the way. They burst onto the landing pad. A battered shuttle waited, engines already spooling up. Johnny felt himself being shoved inside. "Go, go!" Sorensen shouted. The shuttle lurched skyward. Through the view screen, Johnny watched the shipyard erupt. A miniature sun bloomed, devouring metal and flesh alike. He slumped in the co-pilot's chair, every breath an effort. Sorensen's voice seemed to come from far away. "Stay with me, sir. We made it. We actually made it." Johnny stared at the inferno below. New Harris, the colonists, his team, Zahara. So many lives lost. "Sir," Sorensen's voice cracked, "what do we do now?" Johnny's ravaged face twisted into a pained grimace. "They laughed at our army," he rasped, "until they met its human soldiers." Darkness claimed him. The battered shuttle vanished into the star-flecked void, carrying with it the last embers of humanity's defiance.
You have reached the end of the story. If you enjoyed this story and want to support us, please leave a like and subscribe to our channel, and for every comment that says 88, I will heart every single one of them. Thank you for your time.